a couple of folks in the audience joining us to observe, and of course the public is welcome anytime to come to committee and watch, and you can follow online as well on YouTube. We are going to try to adjourn today as close to 11 o'clock as we can, which is unusual for this very busy committee. You know, oftentimes we run over our allotted noon ending time. Today we need to leave a little bit early because the Attorney General is coming over to meet with Senate leadership and to have me in that meeting as well to hear what the legislative agenda is that's important to the Attorney General that we look at this session. So apologize for ending early today, but we will try to do that. Also wanted to let everyone know that the executive orders that we had discussion on last week, they were the governor's executive orders regarding hospital and nursing home facility staff, Executive Order 22-01 and 22-02. They are set to expire January 21st of 2022. So the House is voting on a bill at about 11 o'clock today that, if it passes out of the House, will be sent over to the Senate. And I believe that that bill, House Bill 2477, will likely be referred to Senate Judiciary Committee. And if it is referred to Senate Judiciary Committee today, my intent is that we will have a hearing and work on the bill tomorrow, January 19th. It's imperative that because of the we're expediting the hearing and working of HB 2477 because of that January 21st deadline that the executive order expires, that allows our hospitals and nursing home facilities to have a little bit of flexibility in staff and helping patients. So please have testimony in if you have intent to testify on HB 2477. Please have that in to our committee assistant by, I'm going to check to see what time we need that. Just a moment. If you will have your written testimony submitted by 8 a.m. tomorrow, Wednesday, January 19th, that would be appreciated, and we can then have that ready for committee to look at 10:30 tomorrow. Again, we're expediting the process because our hospitals need the extension of what we're looking at hospital staff. So with that, I will then turn to today's agenda and request any bill introductions. Do we have any bill introductions by committee members or anyone online? Or anyone in the committee meeting room? Hearing and seeing none, then we will turn to the agenda. We had on the agenda a hearing on HB 2075. However, we are going to, because of our 11 o'clock desire to adjourn, we're going to move that to a later date. And we will turn then to discussion and possible final action on House Bill 2387. This is a bill that we heard last session, but because of time constraints and the press of other business, we weren't able to work. And we will ask then Mr. Revisor for a bill brief. And committee members, wanted to let you know that we have continued the procedure that we had in place last session of having the paper folder at your seat when we are meeting as a committee. And you should have the bills that we're going to be hearing and working in your folder, as well as the daily agenda and written testimony. If that's something that you as a committee member don't desire to have at your seat, just let us know, and we will also still provide to all the committee members the information digitally. And the written testimony and the agenda is also posted at the website. While we're waiting for the bill brief, wanted to point out to committee that this is a bill brought to us by the Kansas Peace Officers, the Kansas Sheriff's Association, and the Kansas Chiefs of Police. And without the bill, we have the statutes created in 1981 still on the books, so they need to be updated and amended, which is the purpose of the bill that Mr. Revisor is going to inform us about.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, committee. Just a quick clarification on the source of the bill. The associations you mentioned are involved, but this is the result of that Judicial Council Advisory Committee on DUI. They had two proposals, one about DUI that's currently in the Senate on the floor or below the line, HB 2377, and then this bill that's about aircraft DUI. So I just wanted that background reminder. What I had handed out was a technical amendment that would be necessary to bring the bill into the current year. As you recall, this is a carryover bill, so the 2020 supplement dates are incorrect, not legally accurate, and in order to amend statutes, you need to be amending the current version of the statute. So that's what most of these changes would facilitate, is just making sure we're amending the current law, which thankfully was not amended last year, so all we have to do is change the date. You'll notice there are also a couple, not date changes, but grammar or wording changes that we noticed while we were doing the bigger DUI bill, and we're carrying some of those in here as well that we would consider technical updates just because they help the language make sense, read clearly. So there's not really a substantive issue to any of the changes in here. And the chairperson agreed that that would be a good way to present it to you as a technical update that our office would encourage you to adopt, just to bring the bill forward if you were to pass it out. Just a very broad overview, because there's a lot in this bill and I don't want to spend too much time on it. The point of this bill is to revise the laws relating to operating an aircraft under the influence. There are criminal and administrative penalties. There are provisions in here for testing blood, breath, urine, or other bodily substances, just like we have for DUI and operating a vehicle. There are the current statutes. It's KSA 3-1001 through 3-1005. Those were enacted in 1981, as the chairperson mentioned, and those are repealed by this and replaced with these new sections. Essentially, creating that crime of operating an aircraft under the influence, giving the criminal penalties that would more closely align with the penalties for driving a commercial motor vehicle under the influence or driving under the influence, so making those a little bit more comparable and consistent. And then making clear that the alcohol concentration for that crime is 0.04 or more, which again matches the commercial DUI provision, unlike the current law that does not. And then there are a lot of further new sections that talk about implied consent and the testing procedures and how all of that is going to work, and those also line up with the provisions you would find for driving under Chapter 8, with some changes, of course, because you're operating an aircraft rather than a vehicle. So, but generally consistent with the vehicle laws. And then added by the House Committee, but important to facilitate all of these changes, were some changes to other sections of current law that make clear that when we're referencing these kinds of testing in other statutes, they need to reference these new sections as well, such as, who certifies the test or that sort of thing. So that's what some of those sections added by the House are. They're in bold in your bill. Those are current law, but they needed amendments to be consistent with the changes made in this bill. The only other thing I would point out before I stand for questions, of course, is that if you adopt the technical updates and wish to work this bill further, the House also amended the bill in a substantive way, and I think we highlighted this in the hearing, and I think we're going to talk about it a little more here in a moment. That the House changed the penalty for operating under the influence when your license is suspended. So that's on page 2 of the bill, if you're looking at that. That language that's stricken and then the language in bold replaced it. So the proposal that came from the Judicial Council was that if you were operating while the person convicted did not hold a valid pilot license issued by the Federal Aviation Administration, you had committed a level 6 non-person felony. And then there were some very specific mandatory minimums, just like we have for DUI, right? A certain number of days you have to serve, how you serve those days, the number of hours of confinement, et cetera. The House removed all of that, so there's no mandatory minimum, it's just a level 6. And then they clarified what it meant to not have a license. So the clarification of what it means to not have a license, maybe not so substantive, although important, and a policy choice, of course. But the mandatory minimum versus no mandatory minimum was a substantive change that the council, I think, highlighted for you. And obviously they preferred to have a mandatory minimum, much like we do for DUI or commercial DUI. But the House, as they sent you the bill, had removed that provision. So I just wanted to highlight that substantive difference between what was proposed and what the House sent you. And I'd be happy to answer any other questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Committee, any questions for the reviser? Seeing none, then we will open it up for discussion. Committee, let's address the technical amendment, the technical changes that we need to take a look at if we are going to pass the bill out of committee and make it a session 2022 compliant document. Do we have that amendment to pass out? Oh, wait, I have it right here. I'm sorry. So committee, if you'll take a look at the proposed amendments to House Bill 2387. These are the technical updates that have been passed out. And are there any questions for the reviser about those? Seeing none, then, do we have a motion on the amendment? Yes, Senator Wilborn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I propose that we adopt the amendment that Mr. Thompson outlined, the technical aspects, and the one with some substantive changes.
Yes, and a second from Senator Thompson. Committee, any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, then we will vote on the technical updates to House Bill 2387. All those in favor say aye, please.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. The motion carries. We are back on the bill. Committee, I would like to take a look at the substantive change regarding the penalties, if the reviser will pass that out. And thank you, Ms. Nelson, as well. And then we will have the reviser, Mr. Thompson, please explain the amendment when he can.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair. Jason Thompson again, reviser of statutes. I apologize for the delay. As the chair and I were discussing, we forward the electronic amendment to the committee secretary right as I'm handing it out so that we make sure everybody can see it. So thanks for your patience there. This is the sentencing balloon. It's essentially, it does not just restore the language that's stricken by the House that's underlying there, but it does restore a mandatory minimum penalty, just like the original proposal that was sent to the House did. And the reason for the difference is that as the draft was going through various iterations and then the DUI draft, HB 2377, evolved, they realized that the language to do the mandatory minimum should be this form rather than the form that was in the original bill. So if you look at the language, it's not quite the same as what's stricken, but it is the same as what's on the bottom of page 1 and the top of page 2, right? So you're consistent within the statute and you're consistent with how the council has worked to make the DUI and the aircraft DUI penalties look similar and use similar language. And all this language, like I said, it's a lot of language, but all it does is say that the person who's sentenced for a level 6 will have a mandatory minimum of 30 days of confinement. You'll have to serve at least 48 hours of that in prison, but then after that you can serve it on work release or house arrest, etc. And if you're placed in work release or house arrest, you do have that minimum 30 days with a certain number of hours you have to serve. So it essentially just locks in all of those mandatory minimums, again, just like the DUI statute does. So that's what this amendment would do.
Thank you. Any questions for the reviser, Mr. Thompson? Seeing none, then any discussion on the amendment? Yes, Senator Gossage.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a technical question, I guess. So I'm trying to understand the differences between the two that we have. So this one I understand was the making it up to date, the 2021, et cetera, but it also has lots of bold language. And then this one just has the bold is the new language. So could the reviser help me with that?
Sure, Mr. Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If you're talking about the bold language kind of in the bill itself, that just means that those were changes made by the House. The only thing you would be adding, so in the technical amendment, the only things you were adding were the things in the boxes off to the side, and the only thing you would be adding in this sentencing balloon would be the changes in the boxes off to the side. So all of those would kind of merge together.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Thompson, could you remind us the proposed amendments in the sentencing amendment that we're looking at, are those the same sentencing conditions as in the DUI bill that we passed out of committee last session?
Madam Chair, yes, they are nearly identical to what's in HB 2377.
Okay, so this sentencing amendments then makes them consistent, whether it's operating a vehicle or operating a aircraft. If we pass this amendment, would then be the same. Is that right?
Sorry, Madam Chair. Yes, that's accurate.
Thank you. Senator Corson, did you have a question?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I just had a question. So these would be the same penalties as are in the commercial DUI bill, but they're different penalties than what the Judicial Council initially recommended for aircraft. And I just want to confirm that I'm correct about that. And then could you maybe restate the differences between what's in this amendment if we adopted it and what the penalties were as put forward by the Judicial Council? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Thompson?
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. So let me pull up 2377, just so I can verify exactly the same thing. So you'll notice if you look at the underlying language that's struck there on page 2, the proposal that came over from the Judicial Council was a minimum 90 days, and that 90 days could be served in work release or on house arrest after the person serves 72 consecutive hours of imprisonment. So obviously the first difference here is you've got 30 days and 48 hours, right? So that's one distinction. But part of the rationale for that is that the provisions of HB 2377, that is the penalty that is provided for driving under the influence. So, and I'm pulling that up just to verify because I copied it from there, and I actually, a little peek behind the curtain, the chairperson did authorize me to reach out to the two main folks from the Judicial Council group that allowed, or that essentially drafted this proposal with our office so that we could make sure we were doing things correctly. So I appreciate the chair allowing us to do that, so I have a lot more background on this one than maybe some others. But yeah, this is copied essentially directly from what is in HB 2377 as it left the committee last year. There is a policy choice, I'll be clear about that. The policy choice of going with the 30 days that's in the DUI bill, or the policy choice of going with what was introduced that would have been 90 days, a much longer mandatory minimum. And I'll just point out that with the House removing that entirely, there may have been some shift downward in response to that policy choice by the House, but obviously the Senate could decide they don't like the shift downward that far and they want to go back to 90 days, right? So there's a little bit of maybe negotiation going on here on the numbers, but from my perspective, I was just asked to make it match the DUI statute, and that's what this does.
That's very helpful.
Thank you, Mr.
Madam
Thompson.
Chair.
The committee, any other questions? Any other discussion? Seeing none, then, do we have a motion on the amendment? Senator Thompson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move to adopt the amendment as, adopt the amendment as drafted.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Senator Gossage, thank you. Any discussion? Seeing none, then, we will vote on the amendment. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The motion passes. We are back on the bill. Committee, any other amendments? Seeing none, then, do we have a motion on House Bill 2387? It's as amended, right, Mr. Thompson? Yes, 2387 as amended. Yes, Senator Gossage.
Madam Chair, I move that we approve the Bill 2387 as amended.
Do we have a second? Thank you. Senator Wilborn, thank you. Committee, any discussion? Seeing none, then, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The motion carries. Committee, then, thank you for your work on House Bill 2387 as amended. And that is going to be our last item on the agenda today. And please recall that if House Bill 2477 that relates to the executive orders that were issued January 6th, that if that is referred to Judiciary Committee later today, it is going to be heard and worked tomorrow, January 19th, 2022, in our 1030 committee. Please have all written testimony submitted to our committee assistant, Kim Sage, by 8 a.m. tomorrow. And you can find Kim Sage's email address at kim.sage@senate.kansas.gov. Thank you very much, committee. We are adjourned.